Welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. Join me as we have a real-life discussion on how to change your life by changing your thoughts. Remember, question everything, trust yourself, and find your truth. Welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. My name is Sloan Fremont, and I'm your host. I really love the title for this week. This week's title is Emotionally Nutritious Thoughts and Giving Up Your Investment in Fear. Both of these phrases come from the book of the author I'm interviewing this week. Her name is Gilda Joffe, and she's the author of the book, Dancing with Your Muse, Inner Magic to Release Fear and Embrace Creativity. And if you're someone who fear rules your inner world, which then actually limits what you do in your outer world, or if fear is the compass by which you live your life, and it keeps you stuck in the same place, or if fear just really tends to show up and you feel like it's keeping you from who you really are, then you're not going to want to miss this episode. Gilda and I have an amazing discussion about fear, about what it does to us, about creativity, about the importance of creativity, why we are all creative beings, and you don't have to be an artist or a musician to be considered creative. Creativity shows up for us all day, every day. As humans, we are creators. We're creating everything, which is the title of the show, Create What You Speak. So we really get into these two areas of fear and creativity. And I really love Gilda's perspective on what she has to say. So stay tuned. You're going to love this episode. Before we get into the show, though, I just want to remind you of a couple things. If you're not signed up for my newsletter, please do that. Go to sloanfremont.com. And on the right-hand side, you're going to see just a little box. You can enter your name and email address. No spam will go to you. This is how you can get your updates on latest podcast episodes, on any of the upcoming events I have. I told you last week I'm creating some different products. And so those on my newsletter list will be the first one to know about that. So make sure you sign up there. If you have to, pause this episode, pause the video, pause it however you're listening, get signed up, and then come back and join us. The second thing I want to remind you of is if we're not connected on social media, I would love to connect with you. All my social media links are in the show notes, so please be sure to connect there. Again, pause the video, pause the audio if you have to, so we can get connected because I'd love to learn more about you. And this is how you can stay up to date. You can know what's going on. And also, this is how you can connect with me. If you have questions, if you want to talk about anything on any of the episodes, if you want to carry that conversation over, social media is a great place to do that. So make sure you get connected. Use the links in the show notes before to do all that. All right, so let's get to it. Joining me today is Gilda Joffe, author of the book, Dancing with Your Muse, Inner Magic to Release Fear and Embrace Creativity. Fear of failure is a universal issue that can hold even the most talented of people back from reaching their full potential. This book is a series of 30 essays which speak about the common and debilitating anxieties encountered on the path to creative expression and encourages you to seek success on your own terms. Gilda, I want to welcome you to the show. I'm so happy you're here.
Oh, thank you, Sloan. I really appreciate your inviting me. I'm very happy to be here.
Yes. Well, I have to say, I absolutely loved your book. Everything in the book spoke to me in such a way. As I was making my notes for the show, one of the big things that I appreciated about your book was your sense of humor of how you wrote the stories. And in the essays, when you share your experiences and you share other people's stories that you've worked with, everything was so relatable. It was very gently approached on such a topic that can be one that makes people want to run the other way.
Well, this is true. And people usually do run the other way.
Yeah.
Which is why they don't really get to access the solutions to their own fears.
Right.
And I understand those fears because I've been through them. It's not like I'm talking from Mount Olympus and I've never experienced any of this. This book comes from my own experiences and those of my colleagues and students and friends and clients. So yeah, we don't want to run.
No, exactly. So why don't we start out by having you tell us just a little bit about yourself and what led you to write your book?
Oh, it's a long story, but to make it very short, I was a performing violinist for most of my life. And during that time, I just saw in my own life how when someone being creative or in a business arena or in any other profession, what stops them from moving forward when they can move forward, but simply are afraid of following their own inner vision, so to speak.
Yeah.
Whether it's by society stopping them, saying that they shouldn't go forward, can't go forward, must not go forward, it's not right to go forward, whatever the opinion is,
Mm-hmm.
and following it. And so I saw a lot of that in my students and in my clients, and I saw the pain that came from not following that inner vision. And I really, really wanted to find a way to help people to get beyond that point
Yeah.
so that they would not be stopped.
Yeah. And you, in the beginning of your book, you tell the story of when I think you're around 12 years old and you had this experience at this music recital and you learned something very powerful at that age. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I was petrified. I was more than petrified. I was beyond petrified wood. But what I learned in that experience from that story is that everything I was experiencing was brought on by myself. It might have had an exterior stimulus, but the actual feeling was something that I could control within myself. And when I discovered that, I realized that my whole life could change, which was a huge realization for someone so young. Now, that's not to say that for the rest of my life from the age of 12, everything was hunky-dory and I was able to just, no fear. But it planted a seed within myself. And I understood that it all begins and ends with ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's a huge responsibility, but also a huge freedom.
It is. And it puts the control back on us, right? Because often, especially with fear anxiety often rides along with fear. And I know for myself, those feelings are just like wildfire. They just spread, you can feel them throughout your body. Often I feel mine in my stomach. It feels like somebody's stabbing my stomach. And with that story in the book and you share how really you had both ends of the spectrum where you felt yourself in the fear. And then you saw another student who was able to move more into that calm space. And you saw, wait a minute, if I can do one, I can do the other. And that control, to me, and I talk a lot about it on the show, it's often as if everyone else has the control over us except ourselves. But when we go back into the driver's seat and realize, no, wait a minute, I am the one in control. I am the one. Yes, I can experience these feelings. And being in control doesn't mean, as you said, you're never going to experience fear again. That's not what we're saying with this. But what we are saying is, what are we going to do with that when it comes up again, right? Are we going to let it control us? Are we going to let it have it keep us in our little tiny box where we always stay the same, right? Or we're going to choose to do something different with it.
Right. And exactly everything that you said, and something else which took me rather a long time to realize. But fear is not the enemy. It is not an enemy. Fear is actually a friend. First of all, it's trying to protect you from something which it thinks you need protecting from.
Right.
And secondly, it's a signpost for something else which shows you what you need to surmount in yourself to move forward.
Yeah.
It's simply a sign. Now, obviously, if something is running after you and is going to eat you, you're not going to stand there and analyze it. You're going to run. That's our biological instinct, and we need to follow our instincts because other information is coming in that we don't necessarily know about in our brain, but we know about it somewhere else. So we do not ignore fear, nor are we cowed by it. Fear is a wise counselor, but we need to listen to what it is saying rather than to just take its words and the upper surface of the meaning and just follow that. It's a dialogue with fear to find out what it means.
Right. And I was actually having a conversation with one of my friends the other day, and we were talking about this and about those variations of the voices we hear in our head. And she said, I asked myself, because she was going through something, and she said, I asked myself, whose voice is this actually? Right? Whose voice is saying these things? Is it actually my voice? Is it society's voice? Is it my family's voice? All these different voices. And I think when we're thinking about fear, especially, it's so easy to have everybody else's voices pile in, and it all becomes all meshed together, and we just think it's our own, and we think it's our own thoughts and everything that it comes from us. But if we start to dissect it, pay attention to it, like you're saying, we might realize it's actually not our own voice.
Yes, and I think it's really difficult to realize what is our own voice.
Yeah.
I mean, we have our teachers, we have our parents, we have our friends, we have society, we have pressure from all sorts of people. And it's not so easy to figure out what one really thinks.
Yeah.
Even if you sit down and have a dialogue with yourself and ask yourself, well, what do I really think about this? It's not so easy to come up with an answer. But it is important to at least get an inkling of what we think. And then to try to pull out, like the Gordian knot, try to pull out the threads and figure out what is it that we think, what is it that the society thinks, what is important about both of those points of view, because they may both have something that's truly helpful for us. We need to sort of balance them out and see and tease out what the truth of it is. Not only the truth of the situation, but the truth for ourselves.
Yes.
And those can be two different things.
Totally. And I think even I've often asked myself, what do I, especially if I'm struggling with trying to understand whose voice I'm actually hearing or what's really going, I'll ask myself, what's really going on here? I'll ask myself that to try to start to pull this apart. And then sometimes I'll even say, well, what do I actually want to think about this? What do I want? What is it that if I'm struggling with trying to dissect all the parts of it, what do I actually want to think about? And then I find it easier just to take that path and see where it leads me rather than letting myself, circle the drain and the reasons why I can't come up with the answers, all these things that we do in our heads to try to keep ourselves stuck.
And you just said a really important thing, all the things we do in our heads.
Yeah.
A lot of the decisions, when I'm really stuck and I've made my list of pros and cons and you've done it a million times and I'm nowhere closer than I was when I started, I really then have to go away from my head and go to my heart.
Yeah.
Because there's a huge amount of information. And I just mentioned that as a heart math trainer, having delved into that. There's a huge amount of information that comes to us that we don't access from just using our brain all the time.
Right.
The heart takes in a lot of information from the outside, and we don't always listen. We're not talking about this, of course, in a romantic sense or anything like that. But there's a definite wisdom, which if we train ourselves to listen more often to it, not putting the answer in there and then listening to the answer that we want.
Right.
Listening to the answer that may percolate up and we say, oh, I didn't think of that before.
Yeah.
It's true we didn't think of it because it wasn't a brain thing.
Right.
And number two, it's a wisdom which is trying to reach us, but we don't normally listen to that megaphone.
Yeah.
For information.
And sometimes, we're taught to think with our brains, right? All through school, if you're any job you've had, your lead, like what's the logical thought of whatever the situation is, right? And so that listening into the heart, and what I love about that when we take the time to do that is if you ask your heart questions, you will get answers. You will get answers. And sometimes, again, like you said, it's not the answer that you want it to be, but it's the answer that is there, that it's like you're not paying attention to, or you're stuffing it down. And that stuffing down or not paying attention to is part of the suffering that we put ourselves through.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. And one needs to remember that the brain is like a big library. It makes decisions based upon the information that is in the library.
Yeah.
It only gets but it gets information from outside sources, from the heart, actually. The heart sends 80% information up to the brain. Then the brain makes decisions based on that. But it can only make decisions based on input. It does not make decisions based on other material that the heart has. So that's why you go round and round in circles with the brain, but you don't necessarily get the answer that you want. Now, that is not to discount the brain and everything else. We know how important that is.
Right.
But it is true what you said, that the kind of information you get from your heart is not a predetermined answer based on what you have in your brain already. It's based on other input, which we don't usually pay attention to.
Yes. Yes.
And if you do follow your heart, you will find that you will never make a wrong decision.
Yes. And
It just doesn't work that way.
right.